The fluorescent lights of Committee Room 2154 in the Rayburn House office building cast their familiar harsh glow across the mahogany table where the House Subcommittee on Border Security was convening for what was supposed to be a routine hearing on immigration policy. It was 9:47 a.m. on a humid Thursday in July, and the air conditioning struggled against the heat generated by television cameras, congressional staff, and the palpable tension that always accompanied immigration debates. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat at the far end of the committee table, reviewing her notes for what she expected would be a fact-based discussion about comprehensive immigration reform. Her red folder, the same one that had become her trademark since her first viral congressional moment, contained carefully researched statistics, legal precedents, and testimony from immigration lawyers, Border Patrol agents, and affected families. She had no idea that across the table, Representative Marjorie Greene was preparing to launch what would become the most explosive and ultimately self-destructive political attack in recent memory. MTG had arrived early, supervising the installation of a large LED screen and ensuring that her media team had properly tested the audio-visual equipment. Her staff had spent weeks preparing what they called the Border Reality Project, a multimedia presentation designed to dominate news cycles and social media feeds with visceral imagery and emotionally charged narratives about border security. What they hadn't done was verify a single story. As Committee Chairman Robert Mitchell called the hearing to order, the gallery was packed with reporters, immigration advocates, and conservative activists who had been alerted to expect fireworks. C-SPAN cameras rolled, and live streams began broadcasting to millions of viewers across the country. Today we're examining the real-world impacts of current immigration policy, Chairman Mitchell announced, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had presided over hundreds of contentious hearings. We'll hear from Border Patrol officials, immigration attorneys, and affected communities. The first 2 hours proceeded predictably. Border Patrol Chief Martinez presented statistics showing both the challenges and successes of current enforcement efforts. Immigration attorney Sarah Rodriguez testified about the legal complexities of asylum law and the humanitarian obligations of the United States. Then it was Marjorie Taylor Greene's turn. She stood slowly, deliberately, her eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying prey. The LED screen behind her flickered to life, displaying the seal of the House of Representatives before transitioning to bold red letters. The border crisis, real stories, real consequences. Mr. Chairman, MTG began, her voice carrying a theatrical gravity that immediately shifted the energy in the room. While my colleagues talk about statistics and legal theories, I want to show this committee, and the American people, the human cost of our failed border policies. The screen changed to display a photo of a young Hispanic woman holding a toddler. The image was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, and the subjects appeared unaware they were being photographed. "This is Maria Santos," MTG declared, pointing to the screen with a laser pointer. 3 months ago, she attempted to cross the border illegally with her 2-year-old daughter, Isabella. They were told by coyotes that the journey would be safe, that America's open border policies meant easy passage. She paused dramatically, letting the silence build tension. Maria and Isabella never made it. Their bodies were found in the desert outside Tucson, victims of the lies told by smugglers and the false hope created by politicians who refused to secure our border. The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The image on the screen zoomed in on the woman's face, emphasizing her youth and the trust evident in her expression. But Jasmine Crockett was staring at the photo with a different kind of intensity. Something about the image nagged at her, a familiarity she couldn't quite place. MTG continued, advancing to the next slide. This is the Santos family home in Guatemala, where Maria's mother still waits for news of her daughter and granddaughter. The new image showed a modest concrete house with a corrugated metal roof. An elderly woman sat in the doorway, holding what appeared to be a family photo. "I spoke with Maria's mother last week," MTG said, her voice breaking with manufactured emotion. Through tears, she told me that if she had known the truth about how dangerous the journey would be, she would have done anything to stop her daughter from leaving. More photos followed. Crime scenes cordoned off with yellow tape, Border Patrol agents carrying body bags, distraught family members at makeshift memorials. Each image was accompanied by increasingly graphic and emotionally manipulative narration from MTG. Carlos Mendoza, 16 years old, found dead from dehydration after his guides abandoned him in the Arizona desert. The Flores family, mother, father, and 3 children, whose bodies were discovered by hikers 6 weeks after they attempted to cross near El Paso. Rosa Delgado, 34, who died trying to save her infant son when their smuggler's boat capsized in the Rio Grande. With each story, MTG's voice grew more strident, her gestures more dramatic. She wasn't presenting testimony, she was performing grief, weaponizing tragedy for political gain. "These are not statistics," she declared, slamming her hand on the podium. "These are real people who died because politicians in this very room refused to take border security seriously. Every single one of these deaths could have been prevented if we had a wall, if we had proper enforcement, if we stopped incentivizing illegal immigration with promises of amnesty and sanctuary." The conservative activists in the gallery began to murmur their approval. Phone cameras were raised to capture MTG's passionate performance. On social media, clips of her presentation were already being shared with hashtags like #BorderTragedy and #SecureTheBorder. But Jasmine Crockett was no longer listening to MTG's rhetoric. She was studying the images on the screen with the careful attention of someone who had spent years as a public defender, analyzing evidence and spotting inconsistencies. The photo of Maria Santos was bothering her for a reason she was just beginning to understand. The lighting, the background, the quality of the image. Something was wrong. When MTG's presentation finally ended, Chairman Mitchell recognized Jasmine for her response. The room buzzed with anticipation, expecting either a partisan rebuttal or an emotional reaction to the tragic stories. Instead, Jasmine stood calmly, opened her red folder, and pulled out her phone. "Representative Greene," she said, her voice steady and controlled, "I want to make sure I understand your testimony correctly. You stated that Maria Santos and her daughter Isabella died attempting to cross the border 3 months ago, correct?" MTG straightened, sensing a trap but unsure of its nature. "That's correct. It's a tragic example of what happens when we don't secure our borders." "And you said their bodies were found in the desert outside Tucson?" "Yes, by Border Patrol agents conducting a routine patrol." Jasmine nodded slowly, then raised her phone. "I'm curious about something. Could you display that first photo again, the one you identified as Maria Santos?" MTG signaled to her staff, and the image reappeared on the screen. The room was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Jasmine looked at the photo, then at her phone, then back at the photo. "Representative Greene, do you know where this photograph was actually taken?" "As I stated, it shows Maria Santos before her attempted border crossing." "Actually," Jasmine said, her voice gaining strength, "this photograph was taken in Houston, Texas on March 15th of this year. I know this because the woman in the photo is alive and well, and she posted this exact image to her Facebook page with the caption, 'Beautiful day at the park with my niece.'" The committee room erupted. Reporters leaned forward, cameras swiveled between Jasmine and MTG, and the conservative activists in the gallery fell silent. MTG's face flushed red. "That's impossible. I have verified information about this case." "From what source?" Jasmine asked calmly. From Border Patrol contacts who provided the details." "I see. And what's the name of the Border Patrol agent who found the bodies?" MTG hesitated. That information is confidential for privacy reasons." Jasmine nodded and pulled out a piece of paper from her red folder. "Representative Greene, I have here a statement from Gabriela Hernandez, the woman you've identified as the deceased Maria Santos. She's very much alive, works as a nurse in Houston, and is deeply disturbed that her photograph has been used to fabricate a story about her death." The room exploded into chaos. Camera flashes strobed like lightning, reporters shouted questions, and committee members demanded order. MTG stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. But Jasmine wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, raising her voice above the din, I have statements from several other families whose photographs you've used in your presentation. The Flores family you claimed died crossing the border. They're actually the Gutierrez family from San Antonio, and they're very much alive. The Rosa Delgado, who allegedly drowned in the Rio Grande. She's Rosa Martinez, a teacher from Phoenix who posted that photo to Instagram last month. MTG finally found her voice. This is a setup. You're trying to discredit legitimate concerns about border security. No, Jasmine replied evenly. I'm exposing lies. You've fabricated tragic stories about real people without their knowledge or consent. You've exploited their images to create fictional narratives of death and suffering for political gain. She held up a thick manila folder. I have documented proof that every single case study in your presentation is fabricated. Real families whose photos you've stolen, real people whose identities you've corrupted with false stories of tragedy. The chairman gavelled for order, but the hearing had devolved into complete chaos. MTG's staff was frantically whispering in her ear, trying to formulate damage control strategies. Conservative media representatives in the gallery were already on their phones, attempting to spin the disaster. These families are devastated, Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through the noise with moral authority. They've contacted my office in tears, asking how their vacation photos and family portraits ended up in a congressional hearing attached to stories of death and suffering. You've traumatized real people to score political points with fabricated tragedies. MTG made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Even if there are discrepancies in these specific cases, the broader point about border security remains valid. The broader point, Jasmine shot back, is that you're willing to lie about anything, including the deaths of people who aren't dead, to advance your political agenda. You've committed fraud against these families, against this committee, and against the American people. As the hearing descended into complete pandemonium, Jasmine gathered her materials and walked calmly toward the exit. But not before making one final statement that would define the scandal for weeks to come. Representative Greene, you'll be hearing from my attorneys, and more importantly, you'll be hearing from the attorneys representing every family whose images you've stolen and whose lives you've fictionalized. Because lying to Congress is one thing, but destroying real people's reputations with fabricated stories of their deaths is something else entirely. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, the story had exploded across every media platform in America. MTG lies trended worldwide on Twitter. The hashtag #BorderLies reached 2.3 million mentions within 6 hours. News networks ran wall-to-wall coverage of what they were calling the fabrication hearing. But the real damage was just beginning. The families whose photos had been stolen and whose identities had been corrupted were experiencing trauma that went far beyond public embarrassment. Gabriela Hernandez, the Houston nurse whose image had been used to create the fictional Maria Santos, found herself at the center of a media firestorm that turned her quiet life upside down. I came home from my shift at the hospital to find 50 reporters camped outside my apartment, she later testified in court. My neighbors were staring at me like I was a ghost. My own mother called me crying, asking if I was really alive because she'd seen the news about my death at the border. The psychological impact was even more severe for families with children. The Gutierrez family from San Antonio, who MTG had renamed the Flores family and declared dead in a border-crossing tragedy, struggled to explain to their 3 young children why strangers on the internet were sharing their family photos alongside stories of death and suffering. 8-year-old Sofia Gutierrez had discovered the fake story when classmates showed her the congressional hearing video on their phones during lunch break. She ran home from school in tears, convinced that something terrible had happened to her family that she didn't understand. My daughter asked me if we were ghosts, Roberto Gutierrez explained during an emotional interview with CNN. She wanted to know why the lady on TV said we were dead when we were clearly alive. How do you explain to a child that a grown-up, an elected official, would lie about something so terrible? Child psychologist Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who began treating several of the affected children, described the unique trauma created by MTG's fabrications. These children experienced a form of existential crisis, Dr. Walsh explained. They were forced to confront their own mortality and the mortality of their family members through a narrative they had no control over. It's a type of psychological violence that we rarely see, especially targeted at such young victims. The ripple effects extended throughout the family's communities. Parents at Sofia's school held emergency meetings to discuss how to address the situation with their own children. Teachers required special training on how to handle questions about death, immigration, and the reliability of information found online. Rosa Martinez, the Phoenix teacher whose Instagram photo had been used to create the fictional drowning victim Rosa Delgado, found that the fabricated story had professional consequences beyond the personal trauma. Parents started asking if I was really qualified to teach their children, Martinez explained. Some questioned whether someone who had been involved in border controversies, even as a victim of lies, should be in a classroom. The school district had to issue statements clarifying that I was alive, had never been involved in any border incident, and was a victim of political fraud. The systematic nature of MTG's deception became clearer as investigative journalists dug deeper into her staff's research methods. Internal documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed a sophisticated operation designed to harvest social media images and construct believable fictional narratives around them. MTG's digital communications director, Jake Morrison, had developed what internal emails called the narrative protocol, a step-by-step process for finding social media images that could be repurposed for political storytelling. The protocol was chillingly detailed. Step 1. Search social media platforms for images of Hispanic families using keywords related to travel, family gatherings, and outdoor activities. Step 2. Prioritize images that appeared candid or showed people in vulnerable moments, crying, appearing distressed, or in outdoor settings that could be recontextualized as border-related. Step 3. Reverse search images to ensure they hadn't been used in previous news stories or political campaigns. Step 4. Create fictional biographical details that aligned with anti-immigration narratives while seeming plausible to casual observers. Step 5. Develop tragic backstories that would generate maximum emotional impact while being difficult to immediately verify. The documents showed that Morrison had raised ethical concerns about the protocol in multiple emails to MTG's chief of staff, warning that using real people's images without consent could expose the office to legal liability. "Boss keeps pushing for more compelling personal stories," Morrison wrote in one email. "I've explained that we can't verify these narratives, and using real photos without permission is legally risky." She says narrative impact is more important than technical accuracy. "This feels like we're crossing a line." The chief of staff's response was equally damning. Representative Greene has made it clear that border security is her top priority. She believes that Americans need to see the human cost of failed policies, even if that requires creative storytelling. Legal can handle any complications. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a private WhatsApp group called Border Stories, where MTG's staff had shared drafts of fictional narratives, rating them for emotional impact and viral potential. The group included contractors who specialized in social media manipulation and had previously worked on disinformation campaigns for foreign governments. One contractor, identified in court documents as Digital Consultant A, to protect his identity as a cooperating witness, revealed the industrial scale of MTG's fabrication operation. "We were essentially running a content farm for political misinformation," the consultant testified in a sealed deposition. Representative Greene wanted a constant stream of border tragedy stories that could be deployed across social media platforms, talk radio, and congressional hearings. "We had quotas, at least 3 new fabricated cases per week, each designed to generate maximum outrage and media coverage." The consultant described how the operation had evolved from simple misrepresentation to elaborate fictional world building. "We started by taking real border security incidents and exaggerating the details," he explained. But Representative Greene wanted more dramatic stories, more sympathetic victims, more clear-cut examples of policy failure. "So we began creating entirely fictional scenarios using real people's photos as evidence." The scope of the deception was staggering. Investigators eventually identified over 200 fabricated stories that MTG's office had created and distributed through various channels over an 18-month period. The congressional hearing had showcased only a small fraction of the lies. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery that MTG had attempted to contact some of the real families whose photos she had stolen, not to seek permission or explain her actions, but to try to convince them to play along with the fictional narratives. Phone records showed that MTG's staff had called Gabriela Hernandez 3 times in the weeks before the congressional hearing, claiming to be from a border security research organization and asking if she would be willing to share her immigration experience for a documentary project. When Hernandez declined and asked for more information about the organization, the calls stopped. MTG's office then proceeded to use her photo and create the fictional Maria Santos death story without any further contact. "They tried to trick me into legitimizing their lies," Hernandez said during a press conference. "When I wouldn't cooperate with their fake documentary, they just stole my identity anyway and declared me dead. It's sociopathic behavior." The legal implications extended far beyond the immediate defamation lawsuit. Federal prosecutors began investigating whether MTG's systematic fabrication of evidence for congressional hearings constituted fraud against the United States government. The Justice Department's Public Integrity Section, which handles cases involving government corruption, opened a formal investigation into potential charges, including conspiracy to defraud the United States through the systematic presentation of false information to Congress, wire fraud for using interstate communications to disseminate fabricated stories, identity theft for the unauthorized use of real people's photographs and biographical information, violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, for harvesting social media images without authorization. Legal experts noted that the case represented uncharted territory in the intersection of political speech, digital privacy, and criminal law. "We've never seen a case where an elected official systematically stole private citizens' identities to create an entire fictional narrative for political purposes," explained Professor David Chen from Georgetown Law School's Cybercrime Clinic. Representative Greene didn't just lie about policy. She committed identity theft on an industrial scale to support those lies. The investigation revealed that MTG's fabrication operation had international dimensions. Some of the social media images had been harvested from accounts based in Mexico, Guatemala, and other Central American countries, potentially violating international cybercrime treaties. More troubling, investigators discovered that some of the fabricated stories had been amplified by bot networks linked to foreign governments, suggesting that MTG's disinformation operation had been exploited by hostile nations seeking to increase division in American immigration debates. Representative Greene created a pipeline for foreign interference in domestic policy discussions, noted Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a disinformation expert at the Wilson Center. By generating false narratives about immigration, she provided content that foreign adversaries could amplify to increase social tensions and undermine faith in American institutions. The damage to MTG's political career accelerated as more details emerged. Conservative media outlets that had initially defended her began distancing themselves as the scope of the fabrication became clear. Fox News quietly canceled her regular appearances. Talk radio hosts stopped taking her calls. Even hardcore supporters began questioning whether defending obvious lies was worth the damage to their own credibility. The financial costs mounted rapidly. Beyond the $85 million civil settlement, MTG faced millions in legal fees for both the criminal investigation and multiple ongoing lawsuits. Her campaign fundraising collapsed as donors redirected their contributions to candidates who hadn't been caught systematically lying to Congress. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the impact on legitimate border security discussions. Immigration advocates noted that MTG's fabrications had poisoned the well of public discourse, making it even harder to address real humanitarian concerns at the border. When you flood the information environment with fictional horror stories, explained immigrant rights attorney Carlos Martinez, you make it impossible for people to distinguish between real problems that need solutions and manufactured crises designed for political gain. Representative Greene didn't just lie about specific families, she sabotaged the entire immigration debate. By evening, phone calls were pouring into law offices across Texas as the families affected by MTG's lies sought legal representation. Gabriela Hernandez, the Houston nurse whose photo had been used to create the fictional Maria Santos, was the first to file suit. "I woke up this morning as a private citizen living my life," she told reporters outside her attorney's office. "I'm going to bed tonight having been declared dead by a member of Congress, with my photo broadcast to millions of people as part of a made-up story about border deaths. This isn't just defamation. This is psychological terrorism." The law firm of Rodriguez and Associates, specialists in defamation and privacy law, announced they were representing 12 of the affected families in what would become a class action lawsuit against MTG. Representative Greene didn't just lie, lead attorney Maria Rodriguez explained during a press conference. She committed identity theft on a massive scale, stealing real people's images and biographical information to create elaborate fictional tragedies. She's caused genuine trauma to real families who suddenly found themselves declared dead in front of a national television audience. The legal theory was groundbreaking. MTG had not only defamed the families by creating false narratives about their lives, but it also inflicted intentional emotional distress by fabricating stories of their deaths and broadcasting those fabrications to millions of people. Within 48 hours, the lawsuit was filed in federal court. Hernandez et al. v. Greene, seeking $85 million in damages for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's methodical documentation of MTG's lies had become a viral sensation. The comparison images, MTG's fabricated border stories next to the real social media posts from living families, were shared millions of times across platforms. Late-night comedians had a field day. Stephen Colbert opened his show by reporting his own death using MTG's logic. Saturday Night Live created a fake congressional hearing where members presented increasingly absurd, fabricated tragedies. The humor was cutting because it highlighted the real harm of MTG's actions. But for the affected families, nothing about the situation was funny. The Gutierrez family from San Antonio held their own press conference, with all 5 family members, including the 3 children MTG had claimed were dead, standing together to refute the lies. "Our kids heard about this at school," Father Roberto Gutierrez said, his voice shaking with emotion. "They came home asking if they were really dead, if something bad had happened to them that they didn't remember. Do you understand what it's like to have to reassure your own children that they're alive after a member of Congress declared them dead on national television?" The psychological impact extended beyond the immediate families. Immigration advocates noted that MTG's fabrications had real-world consequences for actual border security discussions and legitimate asylum seekers. When you poison the well of public discourse with fictional horror stories, explained immigration law professor Dr. Elena Martinez, you make it exponentially harder to have rational discussions about real immigration challenges. Representative Greene hasn't just lied about specific families, she's undermined the credibility of genuine humanitarian concerns at the border. Conservative media initially tried to defend MTG, arguing that her broader points about border security remained valid, regardless of the specific accuracy of her examples. But the defense collapsed as more details emerged about the systematic nature of the fabrication. Investigative reporters discovered that MTG's staff had harvested the photos from social media using reverse image searches, deliberately seeking out images that could be manipulated to support fictional narratives. Internal emails obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed that staff members had raised concerns about the accuracy of the stories, but were overruled by MTG personally. One particularly damaging email from MTG's communications director read, "Boss insists we use these images even though we can't verify the stories. Says, narrative impact more important than technical accuracy. This could blow up in our faces." It had blown up spectacularly. The House Ethics Committee announced a formal investigation into MTG's conduct, specifically examining whether her fabrication of evidence during an official congressional hearing constituted a violation of House rules and potentially federal law. Legal experts noted that lying to Congress, even as a member of Congress, could constitute perjury if done under oath. While committee hearings don't always require sworn testimony, the deliberately false statements about specific individuals could potentially support criminal charges for fraud or defamation. But the civil lawsuit was proceeding rapidly. The family's attorneys had assembled a devastating case that combined traditional defamation law with novel theories about the psychological harm caused by being falsely declared dead in a public forum. Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma psychologist retained by the plaintiffs, testified in depositions about the unique psychological impact of MTG's lies. To see your own image broadcast nationally in the context of your fictional death creates a form of dissociative trauma that we rarely encounter, Dr. Chen explained. These families experienced a form of psychological violence. They were forced to confront their own mortality and the mortality of their loved ones through fabricated scenarios designed to exploit their ethnicity and immigration status. The case was further strengthened when Jasmine Crockett agreed to serve as a witness, providing her detailed documentation of MTG's lies and the real-time process of discovering the fabrications during the congressional hearing. Representative Greene didn't make a mistake, Jasmine testified during her deposition. She constructed an elaborate fictional narrative using real people's identities, then presented that fiction as fact to Congress and the American people. This wasn't careless. It was calculated deception designed to manipulate public opinion through fabricated tragedies. MTG's legal team struggled to mount an effective defense. They initially tried to argue that the presentation fell under legislative immunity, claiming that congressional speech was protected from lawsuit regardless of its accuracy. But federal judges rejected that argument, noting that legislative immunity doesn't protect deliberately false statements about specific private individuals, especially when those statements cause documented harm. The defense then shifted to claiming that MTG had relied on information provided by staff and consultants, arguing that she personally hadn't known the stories were fabricated. That defense collapsed when plaintiffs' attorneys deposed MTG herself. Representative Greene, Attorney Maria Rodriguez asked during the deposition, when you told the committee that you had spoken with Maria Santos's mother last week, was that statement true? MTG shifted uncomfortably. I was speaking generally about conversations with affected families. But specifically, did you speak with the mother of the woman you identified as Maria Santos? The information came through intermediaries. So you did not personally speak with this woman's mother? No. Because Maria Santos doesn't exist, does she, Representative Greene? I was presenting information provided by my staff about border security concerns. Information that your staff told you was fabricated, correct? MTG's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Under oath, MTG had essentially admitted that she had knowingly presented fabricated information to Congress while claiming personal knowledge of conversations that never occurred. The case settled out of court for $85 million, the largest defamation settlement in congressional history. But the financial cost was only part of MTG's destruction. The House Ethics Committee recommended formal censure for conduct unbecoming a member of Congress and prejudicial to its honor and dignity. The vote was bipartisan, with even some conservative Republicans acknowledging that fabricating tragic stories about real families crossed lines that couldn't be defended. MTG's media empire collapsed. Book deals were canceled. Speaking engagements disappeared. Social media platforms began flagging her content with warnings about previous fabrications. Her fundraising dried up as donors distanced themselves from the scandal. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the impact on her credibility regarding any future policy discussions. She had transformed herself from a controversial but influential voice into a political punchline whose statements would always be met with skepticism and fact-checking. The affected families used their settlement money to establish the Truth in Immigration Policy Foundation, dedicated to fact-checking immigration-related claims and providing resources for communities affected by political misinformation. Gabriela Hernandez, the nurse whose photo had sparked the scandal, became a national advocate for digital privacy rights and the responsible use of social media images in political discourse. Representative Greene thought she could use our faces and our families to advance her political career, Hernandez said during the foundation's launch event. Instead, she created a movement for truth and accountability that will outlast anything she ever accomplished in Congress. For Jasmine Crockett, the MTG fabrication scandal represented a different kind of victory than her previous legal and political triumphs. This wasn't about defeating an opponent. It was about defending the integrity of facts themselves in an era when political figures felt entitled to create their own reality. Democracy depends on shared truth, she reflected during an interview 6 months after the hearing. When elected officials feel free to fabricate tragic stories about real people for political gain, they're not just lying about immigration policy. They're attacking the foundation of honest governance itself. The red folder that had become Jasmine's trademark now carried additional significance. It represented more than preparation and legal acumen. It had become a symbol of the meticulous fact-checking and evidence-based approach necessary to counter political misinformation. Years later, journalism schools would teach the MTG scandal as a case study in both the power and responsibility of real-time fact-checking. Political science courses examined it as an example of how fabricated narratives could be systematically dismantled through careful documentation and strategic revelation. But for the families whose lives had been exploited, the lesson was simpler. Truth matters, lies have consequences, and real people deserve better than being used as props in fictional political theater. The $85 million settlement was just the beginning. It represented something more valuable than money, the principle that real people's lives and identities couldn't be sacrificed for political gain without facing genuine accountability. In the months following the settlement, the affected families became unexpected advocates for digital privacy rights and political accountability. Gabriela Hernandez testified before multiple congressional committees about the need for stronger protections against the unauthorized use of personal images in political campaigns. "What happened to us could happen to anyone," she told the House Judiciary Committee. "In the digital age, any photo you post online could be stolen and repurposed to support political lies. We need laws that protect ordinary citizens from having their identities weaponized by politicians." The family's advocacy led to the introduction of the Digital Identity Protection Act, bipartisan legislation that would create criminal penalties for the unauthorized use of private citizens' images in political advertising or official government presentations. The bill, nicknamed Gabriela's Law by its supporters, gained momentum as more Americans realized how vulnerable they were to identity theft by political operatives. Rosa Martinez, the Phoenix teacher whose photo had been used to create a fictional drowning victim, became a national spokesperson for media literacy education. She developed curriculum modules that taught students how to identify fabricated news stories and verify the sources of viral content. "My students now know how to reverse search images, check publication dates, and verify claims before sharing content," Martinez explained during a conference of educators. "If we're going to prevent future Marjorie Taylor Greenes from exploiting innocent people, we need to teach digital literacy as a core life skill." The Gutierrez family channeled their experience into child advocacy, working with psychologists to develop resources for families whose children had been exposed to traumatic misinformation. Their foundation provided counseling services and educational materials to help parents discuss difficult topics like death, immigration, and the reliability of information sources. Our kids learned that adults don't always tell the truth, even adults in important positions, explained Roberto Gutierrez. But they also learned that other adults, like Congresswoman Crockett, will fight to protect truth and hold liars accountable. We want children to understand both realities. Guatemala's foreign ministry issued a particularly strong statement. The use of our citizens' images to create false narratives of death and suffering represents a form of cultural exploitation that damages not only the individuals involved but the reputation of our country and our people. The diplomatic fallout extended to discussions about social media regulation and international cooperation on cybercrime. The European Union cited MTG's case as evidence that American social media platforms needed stronger oversight of political content, leading to new international agreements on digital rights and cross-border identity theft. For Jasmine Crockett, the victory represented an evolution in her understanding of political accountability in the digital age. The traditional tools of congressional oversight, hearings, investigations, ethics complaints, had proven insufficient to address the speed and scale of modern political disinformation. We caught Representative Greene in real time because I happened to recognize one of the stolen photos, Jasmine reflected during a Harvard Law School symposium on digital democracy. But how many lies go undetected because the victims don't have platforms to speak out or because the fabrications are more sophisticated? Her question sparked a new initiative, the Congressional Fact-Checking Caucus, a bipartisan group dedicated to real-time verification of claims made during official proceedings. The caucus developed protocols for rapid response to suspicious claims and created partnerships with academic institutions to provide expert analysis during hearings. In the end, Marjorie Taylor Greene had gotten exactly what she deserved, complete and total exposure of the truth she had tried so hard to hide. But more importantly, her victims had gotten something valuable too, the power to ensure that their suffering would prevent others from experiencing the same violation of trust and dignity. The fabrication scandal had ended with justice, but its real victory was in the lasting protection it created for ordinary citizens in an age when their images and identities could be weaponized by those in power. In the end, Marjorie Taylor Greene had gotten exactly what she deserved, complete and total exposure of the truth she had tried so hard to hide. The MTG fabrication scandal established new legal precedents for holding politicians accountable for deliberate misinformation about private citizens. The case became a template for future lawsuits against public figures who exploit real people's identities for political gain. Most importantly, it demonstrated that in the digital age, lies can be fact-checked in real time, and those who choose deception over truth will face consequences that extend far beyond political embarrassment. Sometimes the most important victories aren't about defeating opponents. They're about defending the very concept of truth itself.